Y'all a little bit about Kedar. He is an anti-caste activist, a game designer, and a creative technologist. He is passionate about building tools to help progressive organizers win, which is, I like the sound of that. In the past, he has co-founded Play Loops, a short video creation and discovery platform for movement organizations. And currently he's the co-founder at Organize, co-founder at Organize, which is a social media toolkit solution that makes it easy for organizers and communities to coordinate and trend their narratives on social media. Which to me is like, you basically are a magician. Like, I don't know how you do anything that you do, but anything that makes it easier for folks like me who are technologically challenged to make the best use of these platforms and get our message out is so appreciated. And I'm so excited to share and hear a bit more about how you came to that work. So like I said, you and I met in 2019. We both work with Center for Story-Based Strategy, and both of us were CSS fellows this year. So the same fellowship that helped Shred to become what it is now. When we applied, we didn't even know it was going to be a magazine. We were like, we have this vague idea, we want to do something. And CSS accepting us as fellows really helped us to bring form to what we were trying to do. And Kedar was also part of that fellowship with Organize. And so we got to kind of see each other's processes throughout the year, give each other feedback, which was really, really cool. And we'll certainly talk a lot about all of the stuff that Kedar, you've organized through all of your work and through the CSS fellowship. I'm really excited to hear also more about how you integrate narrative into your work. And I also just want to know what brings you joy and why you do what you do. I can see you have some beautiful art behind you, so hopefully we can talk a little bit about that too. First, here at Shred, we do like to treat our nervous systems well, pay a little bit of attention to what our systems might need or want from us. They do so much to help us navigate the world, and especially as we re-enter back into more interaction with warm weather and with more folks being vaccinated. I highly recommend that you try to develop some kind of practice to check in with yourself, whether that's physically, mentally, emotionally, all three. Just because comfort and care can go such a long way in helping us to navigate challenges and be resilient, and also to get actual good rest and like absorb our nutrients. So I like to start every show with just a nice deep exhale. If you like deep exhales, you can join me with that now. Helps to slow the heartbeat. I had a kind of anxious day, so I'm kind of indulging in a lot of deep exhales. And maybe if you want to do something while you're listening to this, if you want to maybe walk outside or maybe just cuddle up in bed, whatever you can do to make yourself real comfortable if you have time, that's great. We also like Shred to feel a little bit like a party when it can. And that's especially one of my goals when I'm catching up with someone that I don't get to see very often, which is everybody now. So Kedar, what are you doing to kind of feel like it's a bit of a party today?
Hi, Ruby. Yeah, so I recently discovered reaction videos, and I've been binging a lot on watching random people look at videos of Desi song and dance videos, music videos, and I've been having tons of fun doing that. Watching other people watch others.
Okay, and what is it about that that feels fun? Is it like their expressions, or like what does that make you feel like?
Yeah, it's about like the shared community of like, oh yeah, that's how I would react too, like realizing in someone else your own joy. I think is I don't know. I hope I'm articulating it right, but it's. I mean, Twitch got it right. Like watching, they got started with audiences watching video game gameplay. I think even watching other videos is tons of fun.
Yeah, it's so cool how it's obvious that might happen in person, but it's so cool that it can happen through a screen too, and that we can get similar kind of brain stuff going on when we just watch somebody's face. That's really awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, for me, I am drinking some Topo Chico with bitters in it, which is really delicious. And I have this cool water bottle my mom gave me that has like room for crystals in the bottom. So I've kind of like put party vibes into those and feel like I'm like kind of like getting to share space with my mom, even though she's not here, which is always fun. My mom is a blast to hang out with. I got to see her this past weekend. So that's my party vibe. Thanks for sharing, Kedar. I'm going to do my little framing for everything that we do here at Shred. We always like to remind ourselves and each other that we are animals that exist in a dual world. So we have a world of sensory real-time material experiences, and then we process those in our virtual world of symbols, meaning, and language. And we use those symbols and words to describe things in the world that are not static. And so ideologies, movements, political labels, even people, historical figures, writers, all of these things are processes. And when we set out to communicate about them, we always need to remember, strive to remember that what we're actually doing is saying, when we say that something is this or is that, we're using symbols to point to a thing that's happening in the world, but the symbol is not the thing. The two are kind of different. And so let's just keep remembering that the words we use are inexact and they are helpful. And also there's always things that we will not be able to actually describe with our words. So we try to keep that in mind, and remember that Kedar and I are processes too, and that we're processing together. And we're from very similar and also different contexts and backgrounds and timelines. And the labels that we currently use for our experiences are grounded in history and current processes. And the way that we think and feel about ourselves and describe ourselves now might not be the same tomorrow or 5 years from now. So we're all constantly in process and just trying to point at what's going on and be like, are you seeing that? Am I seeing that? How can we talk about it? Kedar, anything you'd like to add to frame our conversation today?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that it got me thinking about some Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics, which is a book that goes into looking at different kinds of art styles from realistic to abstract to the symbolic, and so specifically the visual image, and also you know, when it comes to change and evolution, I think recently I've been finding myself expecting change and readying myself for a future change, so that when I do learn something radically different or grow in unexpected ways, I'm not completely upset, and I can like go with it, I can roll with it. So yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a constant practice, right? In a world that tells us you have to firmly label yourself and everything you do, it can be really jarring when you're like, what if I've been labeling myself in a way that I don't agree with anymore? Oh my God.
Yeah.
But that happens every day. That happens all the time. We can roll with it. We can help each other through it. And I'm so happy to hear that you've been cultivating that practice. And so you said that was Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics?
Yeah.
Okay,
Right.
I'm going to check that out. Cool. Well, let's just get right into it. I usually start by asking people what their origin story is. How did you come to this point in your life?
Well, let's see. I have always been kind of inward looking and wanting to explore my own identity through art, and this is probably because we moved around a lot when I was a kid, and experiencing different cultures meant me interrogating myself and the world about where is it that I actually belong, where is it that I come from, who is it that I am. I used to spend a lot of time in libraries, especially the South Asian fiction section, and I would read like all those books and enjoyed really, like finding the characters that were most like my own history up until that point, and then really like feeling at home through those characters. And as I mentioned, I did a lot of art. Like you can see in my back is a painting that I did in senior year of high school. And again, these are the people that are in that painting are family members. Like that's my aunt who has this very dynamic, defiant, rebellious pose that I was really resonating with at that point in life, and those the heads next to her or other people from my life, and yeah, and I was using art to, like I said, really understand where it is that I come from. But as I kind of went into college and undergrad and grad school, I also had this sense that like I was I was developing a style, I was developing different art, but at the same time that I needed to understand so much more about life before I could uh, create something that would be a commentary about it. Um, so yeah, so I think it was in grad school that I first started to learn about my own caste privilege and caste background. And it was really upsetting for me at the time because I had spent all this time since middle school, high school, college, um, trying to understand where does that come from, and it was completely shielded from me, and it's because of this layer of privilege that was protecting where I went, who I interacted with, and what those interactions looked like. Um, yeah, so yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of started there in grad school, and started even once I took up a job, like I all I could think of was like, how can I was really unhappy in my first job, and I've only ever had one job out of college, out of grad school, really, and I've not held, a job since that's a full-time employment. But um, when I was let go from that particular job, I think I was working as a game designer at the time. I started immediately to, volunteer with grassroots organizers who were working against the creep of casteism and Hindu fundamentalism in the United States, and that's something that for me like answered a lot of questions that I was asking when I was younger,
Mhm.
and the world just made so much more sense, and it was really meaningful to be working and moving with folks that had been doing this work for a lot longer than I had, and learning how to be an ally. I think uh, for someone from a privileged caste background, and you know just being able to articulate that language was something that I learned thanks to the folks that I moved with.
Mhm.
Yeah, so yeah, since then I've always strived to bring my kind of art and technical background and see how I can fuse that to advance the work when it comes to organizing.
Mhm. So
So
cool.
yeah,
Oh yeah, okay, go ahead.
no, please.
I definitely relate to that. Like, who am I? Where do I fit in? What's going on? I recall I was talking to somebody the other day, and I was like, where did I gravitate to in the library? And it was honestly to Black mythology, because I am mixed, and I was really I got a lot of really confusing messages about who I was and who I was allowed to be and who I wasn't allowed to be growing up. And I so wanted to figure out that part of my context, and I didn't know how to talk about it. And I remember just trying to like find books that would help me understand. And now I've come to the point where I'm like, I have just become comfortable in the uncertainty, and that is a beautiful place to be. But it definitely informs how I move in the world. And I became more comfortable in that uncertainty once I started doing work on it. Once I was like, okay, I'm doing something to change the fact that some of my relatives are treated so much more poorly than me. Um, and that made it feel like, not that I had an answer, but that there was less of a discomfort with having all these questions. So really cool to hear that similarity.
Yeah.
um, yeah, and I'm curious what it felt like um, to kind of like begin to take action when you were saying it's like, do I know enough to take action? Because I used to think that too when I first started grassroots work. I was like, I'm going to sit in a workshop, I'm going to learn a lot for a couple of years, and then an organizer was like, no, you're going to leave the workshop because we need people who know that there's a problem to actually take action. So how did that feel for you when you decided you were ready to start doing?
Yeah, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think naturally I'm kind of a little bit shy and introverted, and I tend not to, if I can help it, not tend not to, take action, and then and and worry about, what if it's not the right action, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, I remember in my parents enrolled me in karate lessons and or taekwondo lessons when I was younger, and the lady that was enrolling called me like some strange name, like Albert, something completely different from Kedar. And she was like, Albert, come on
Albert.
in, like let's sign you up for taekwondo lessons. And I, at the time, I wasn't like confident, or I don't know what it was, but I did not correct her. And I still remember that day. All this to say, like, I try to make an effort to act when I can, and realize that I am going to make mistakes, and like we discussed before, things are ever changing and we're all growing. So it's better to, I think, move with good intentions and make those mistakes, but maybe not like intentionally.
Right. Incorporate reflection.
Yeah.
Check yourself from time to time as often as possible. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, when we were getting ready to launch Shred, we were basically like, how do we tell people that we're aware that we will develop? Like we lead everything with, we are aware that we are not perfect, that our ideas are not complete. And it's really important to us to keep that clear, so as to not try to dominate and be correct, but to say we are so curious and it is so obvious that we need to take action. And it's easier to mobilize when you know that you can revise and kind of adjust, rather than saying I'm going to pick a path and stick to it forever, or else it's the wrong path, you know.
Yeah.
So I'm really happy to hear that you have been cultivating that, and happy to hear how you're describing your process. So let's talk a little bit about Organize and what inspired you to develop that platform. Did it come out of all of this grassroots work you were doing?
Yeah, it very much did. Like one of some of the early projects I did in my grassroots organizing was develop small games. I had the idea to do really tiny 10-second games, um, about that would really introduce folks to issues that they weren't familiar with. But when it came to sharing out those games, you couldn't really share games on social media, which was, you know, the prevalent medium through which you would like dispersed information, narratives. And so I screen captured myself playing these games and then turn them into GIFs, and then I would share them. And these, along with kind of a like a coordinated effort of pushing these GIFs on social media, really helped us get attention, get news coverage, and eventually made a difference for our campaigns. So that's what inspired me to get going on a building tools for other folks to make it easier for them to also create GIFs that can have that kind of impact. Yeah, like you mentioned, I one of the first organization and tool that I built was Playloops, which was, at the time, like Giphy and all these GIF libraries were just devoid of anything remotely related to movement, our movements or organizing or any of the issues that we care for. So I had envisioned it as a way of, as a library of content for our movements, and also tools that could make it easy for folks to create GIFs. And it was also during that period that I realized, like, just building tools and giving folks access to content wasn't enough, that it was also the second part, which is distribution. And that's exactly why I built Organizers, because I participated myself. I've coordinated a lot of Twitter storms in the past. Twitter storms are basically actions on social media to push out content and get it to trend. And it's a monotonous process, especially if you're doing it on tight deadlines, and you're trying to recruit folks that just participated in action last weekend to again come out this weekend. It can be draining. So I built this platform to make it easier for folks to Basically, it's like a glorified social media toolkit, right? Like when you think about a social media toolkit, it's a Google Doc and a folder with graphics, right?
Mhm.
And so this is acts like a central hub for that kind of content, and also automates other processes like sending people reminders to come out to the Twitter storm to schedule another tweet, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I recall one of the first things I did during quarantine was kind of beta test organize with you.
Yeah.
And I am not a Twitter person. I love social media. I don't love, that's a strong word. I am very into using social media. It's a big part of my life. I find it fascinating, and I find it um, what I like about it is that I'm constantly scanning how things are evolving, and how different dialogues and the dialect is evolving, and what people are saying and what symbols they're using and what words. And Twitter, I feel like, has always just been too fast for me and too mean for me. And like, that's saying a lot, considering it's like social media can be very mean. I'm very much into Instagram, where people are like showing beautiful things and sharing funny memes. I love memes. And so
Yeah.
when I get on Twitter, or when I tried to get on Twitter previously, I was like, this is so fast. I don't know who to follow. It's just an endless, you could just scroll forever and have no idea who's saying what and why and what's the point. And so for me, it goes over my head. But now this year in quarantine, I started to use Twitter a little bit more. Like, I just was like, well, I'm just going to use it how I want to use it. I'm going to follow people that I'm interested in. And I don't tweet that often, but I'm starting to understand why it's so useful when planning engaging social media efforts, and why it's useful to target people on Twitter and to kind of raise awareness on Twitter. So can you tell me a little bit about how Organize is different from a regular Twitter storm, and more so, like, what pieces allow for more engagement for maybe even people like me who aren't big Twitter users?
Yeah, it's not necessarily different from a manually coordinated Twitter storm, but it basically allows you to coordinate one more efficiently and with less effort. So, like I said, the first part that it really I think is a differentiator for Organize is that we allow entire communities to schedule tweets that would go out live during the short couple of hours that a Twitter storm exists for.
Mhm.
So unlike tools like today, we have Social Sprout and Falcon and these other social media tools that are essentially meant for small internal teams within organizations. And so it doesn't really allow for, even if a tool like TweetDeck, for example, that was bought by Twitter, uh, is for individuals to schedule tweets for a certain time. But the innovation that we bring is that we, all you have to do as an activist or as a supporter of a campaign is to create a tweet, and then Organize then is able to schedule all the tweets for a campaign for a particular time without the individuals having to think about when their tweet is going to go out and that kind of thing.
Okay.
Um, so yeah, so I think that's at the core of what the benefit of Organize. And of course, we also support GIFs and videos, and that's something coming up also that I'm excited for, and that we're actually working together on, is in customizable GIFs, right? Like, there's this organization called Interaction Lab that produces beautiful GIFs for the movement. I think they hire animators across the country who are embedded in all these different movements, and they come out with beautiful GIFs. And the vision I have for Organize is able for folks to be able to personalize these GIFs and share them out as part of the campaign. So it's no longer about, I guess, to step back a little bit, the other focus at Organize is to really bring up people's creativity and individual perspectives in support of a campaign,
Mhm.
rather than copy pasting sample tweets or language that's been created by an organizer. Not that that's always a bad thing, but to infuse campaigning with creativity. And I think these custom gifts or gifts that folks can personalize, I think, is another step in that direction for us.
Yeah, I'm so excited for that work. We're going to hopefully be doing this in collaboration with Closing the Hunger Gap. So our goal with this campaign is to help move us away from charity as a model for emergency food distribution and towards justice, and saying, if we're interested in making sure people are fed, let's put our efforts, yes, to getting people food, but also to getting people good wages and making sure that people who produce food can afford to eat the food they produce, which is obviously, we're up against huge mammoth, enemies in this fight, like Amazon, Walmart, all of the awful farming organizations that have colonized the world and exploit migrant workers. And so there's a really great opportunity here to kind of transition people who are doing amazing things, really wonderful to volunteer or work at a food bank, and also to illuminate that we could also use our power to end the need for food banks. And so I'm very excited at the idea of incorporating creativity into this. And part of what is so interesting about Organize, and I think also story-based strategy more generally, is, and something that was jarring for me is, as an organizer, I was so intent on like controlling the message and making sure it was right and on point and like in alignment. And when you open it up to creativity, it's like, what if somebody says something that isn't as aligned as I want it to be? What if they answer, what if they say something that's opposed to our goal? Like, oh, this is like it's like, it was scary for me to open up those possibilities. And I think that's okay. I think it's okay to sit with the fact that we work really hard on the messaging we craft, and we say what we want to say for a reason. And like with Shred, we're examining the words and we're trying to be intentional. And also you get into ruts and stagnant, like you said, copying and pasting, and it's a Twitter storm of the same 5 tweets. And so opening it up and trusting people to really contribute their perspective, I think actually makes our campaigns much more living and breathing and flexible and adaptable. And I was curious if the Story-Based Strategy Fellowship had anything to do with kind of enhancing that piece for Organize for you.
Yeah, for the CSS Center for Story-Based Strategy Fellowship, I use that to really create tools for organizers on Organize to come up with prompts or talking points, as we call them. Basically, they're prompts to really get people thinking about what they can create a tweet about. So we're transitioning, moving away from sample tweets framework, which you can still do, is incorporate sample tweets into Organize if that's something you really want to do, but also move towards coming up with questions or things to think about, or challenges for example, for participants in the campaign. And I use the fellowship to come up with a tool that helps organizers come up with that question. And so I specifically used Race Forward's narrative pyramid tool, which is this kind of worksheet that you can check out online, that asks folks to, as campaigners or organizers, to make sure that their narrative or messaging for a particular campaign is in alignment with their larger worldviews and ideals. And that's something that I use to create a Mad Lib-like framework that, for example, that asks organizers, what is your worldview and what is the objective of this campaign in short phrases, and then a Mad Lib prompt that says, like, how is achieving this campaign going to help with achieving this worldview of yours, so that was the experiment with that I tried out with CSS.
So cool. And again, integrating that opportunity for reflection, making sure, let's stop, let's really consider, are we on the right track, or what are we trying to achieve and why? And is this effort going to help us, or is it something we've been doing forever and it's just the same thing again and again? I really love that prompt to be creative and to say, as an organizer, not what would you say, but what would you ask? What would you encourage others to reflect on and think about? I love that. It feels like it's like a way to work that muscle out that kind of can feel atrophied when we're just very on message all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Absolutely. Yeah, especially if I think choice and agency is always empowering, and I think that's something that I realize, especially as a game designer, someone who comes from games, where it's all about user choice and user agency in these worlds that have been constructed
Hmm.
by the designers of the games.
Cool. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about games because I am like not a gamer at all. Growing up, I was an only child, and my cousin was really into Sega, and I would go over and just watch him play for like hours. But I was not a person who was like I would play Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine and like Tetris, but I can't deal with like battles or really complicated puzzles. And it's that sense of urgency that freaks me out. It's like Twitter; it's too fast. I'm like, what's going on and why?
Yeah.
So can you tell me a little bit about how your experience with games translates into or feels useful in terms of like social justice and movement work?
Yeah, absolutely. I think let's see. I think games are really good at getting the getting players to really empathize with points of views that they might not have encountered before, and that's because of the you know that's because of this like immersive quality of games where you're like put into the hot seat, and asked to make decisions as though you're playing someone else, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a very quick way to understand what someone else might be going through. I think that is super underutilized in games today. I mean, there's entire conferences dedicated to games and social justice. Like there's one called Games for Change out in New York. But I find like a lot of those games are kind of you do this you play our game and you as you level up we're going to donate something to whatever charity that they've decided, as a game company. And that's again coming back to this charity model that seems kind of tacked on to games, and I really want to explore how the interactive medium as more generally can be brought to organizing and really the mainstream. I think the problem is games are very niche even now, and the more mainstream they can become, like the more and sad to say, like I think social media platforms are the ones uh, that define what mainstream technology is because we're all on social media and we're all addicted to it. But if you're not going to have a game as you're scrolling through your feed, then you're not going to play it.
Mm-hmm.
As simple as that. But yeah, I think there's a ton of value in incorporating games in organizing. I, I don't know exactly how. That's something that I'm trying to figure out constantly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, hearing that like, oh, just play the game and we will donate is different than this game will transform how you perceive the world.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay. And obviously we understand that like Call of Duty is a militarized, like the military funds that, like they want young people to be desensitized to violence and prepared for war. And I think a lot about how we could kind of counteract that with games that are just as engaging and exciting, but in terms of how can you best serve your community or find peace and comfort within yourself, something like that. I don't know how that translates to a game, but that would be amazing to kind of turn that technology towards facilitating our natural impulses to be social and to help each other.
Yeah, I think there's also examples of like protest art within massively multiplayer games, where you have these like shooter games, but then they've been modded so that you can go around posting graffiti, instead of shooting people, and or you can also shoot the other characters in the game, but also there's the kind of this subversive element to the game or that particular mod of the game.
So cool.
Yeah, and I think especially true with like open worlds where there's a lot of, I think that's like the more interesting space for me as far as games is concerned, is where you're collaboratively or at least engaging with where you're playing with others.
Mm-hmm.
And that becomes so much more interesting because it's a human to human interaction and so much more richer than interacting with the AI or like a scripted character that someone's designed.
Yeah.
So I think yeah, I tend to gravitate towards multiplayer games, collaborative games, and especially collaborative games because the there's a sense of togetherness, of community, of having a common goal and like working towards it, and it can be really you can really come together quickly as players of the game.
Mhm.
If you have the same objective. Uh,
Yeah.
so yeah.
That's so cool. I feel like before the quarantine, I didn't quite. I kind of got it. Like I had some friends that would be like, "Oh, I have my game friends, and like I really look forward to playing a multiple player game with them." And I would be at a friend's house, and like her boyfriend would be talking to his dude friends, and it was obvious that this was like the best social moment of his whole day. And I was like, I just can't relate. Like I don't know if I would be able to relate. And through quarantine, I did do a little bit of collaborative gaming, actually with Patrick and Eli from Shred. We've been playing. What Patrick is our producer. Patrick, can you tell me the name of the game we were playing? Okay.
Okay.
It was really fun. I don't know what I'm doing, and I would always lose, and I was like, well, that's fine. I don't care. This was fun anyway. Like that was just fun to talk, you know. So I think I don't have a lot of competitiveness, and so another reason that I have a hard time getting into games is I'm like, I just don't care if I win or not. But collaboratively, or if the game is pretty, or just there's cool stuff that happens, or like exploring, kind of like discovering, all of that is much more exciting for me than like let's kill each other. So
Yeah, there's scope for everything in games, I
yeah.
think. Yeah, I mean, yeah, even yeah, I mean, I think it's funny, however, that a lot of games can also be escapist, right? Like a lot of game mechanics are based on things that you otherwise wouldn't never do in real life. Like
Hmm.
in GTA, being able to run over pedestrians, in a car, or just the act of destruction as a mechanic is can be really pleasurable as a game mechanic in a virtual world, obviously.
Yeah.
um but yeah, I think I'm excited for games, and also I like games that are the because they can give you a sense of understanding of society at a systems level, if not society, the world of the game, and at a systems level. And that's something that I want to bring more to story-based strategy and narrative strategy, is like how can we, in addition to thinking about narratives, also think about systems, and
Hmm.
what are the intersections there, because I see that in games a lot, where there's intersections of there's games that are very prescriptive, or very like when he they're called like tycoon games. You're on a roller coaster and you don't have much of a choice. You kind of click the next button and you go to the next scene, that kind of a thing.
Hmm.
They're not very explorative.
Hmm.
um, but there's also games where, like the game of chess, where it's so dynamic, but just based off of a set of underlying rules.
Hmm.
So I think so I, yeah so I kind of want to spend some more time at some point reflecting on what that could mean for organizing. The book Immersion Strategy, for example, I tried to
Hmm.
get into that. I couldn't finish it, but uh, but uh, but I feel like that's where that's going, right? Like, but I wasn't in the frame of mind to explore that when I was reading that book. But maybe I should go back to it.
That's one I tried to read, and at the time I was like, no, we're at war. Don't tell me to be nice and quiet and calm. I'm not a plant. I'm a machine. And now I'm like, no, I'm a plant. Okay, let me. What do I want? That's probably what other people want. Maybe I should treat myself well. Okay, I need to revisit that book as well. Love her work.
Yeah.
So I understand that you came to what you do because you're interested in applying creative art to social justice. And that's obviously a huge part of what we're working on here at Shred and interrogating is how to use art to empower our struggle for justice and what it means to be paid for art, what it means to work in art as an artist or as a cultural worker, and the limitations of art that is revolutionary only in an aesthetic sense, and similar to narratives that are revolutionary only in an aesthetic sense. We're going to tell a story about who we are that is something other than like the system that we're up against and how we can fight that system. You know, and so we're constantly kind of trying to kindly and with care integrate if something really is revolutionary or if it's just aesthetically on the surface a story about how things could be with no plan to actually get there. And all of it is beautiful, like no hate to people who make beautiful revolutionary art, but there's a difference between writing a song about revolution and actually designing a way to change power dynamics. And like I said before, coding and digital art is not familiar for me at all. I make very physical art out of literal garbage. Like I take things that I find in the world and make things out of them. And so a blank canvas is kind of the most terrifying thing to me. And to me, coding feels like the blankest canvas possible. So can you tell me a bit about creative coding, what those words mean, what that phrase means to you, and the possibilities that open up when we integrate that kind of work into our social justice efforts?
Yeah, that's a good question. So yeah, creative coding for me, it's a term that I mostly associated with university because that's when I encountered it, and that's when I stopped encountering it too after university. Basically, it's kind of visualizations and animations and real-time expressions of that that are rendered with code. And often this can be something that like it's a visualization that can be changed in real time as you're coding. You know, you change something in the code and it's immediately reflected in the visualization. And yeah, you know, from something like that to live DJing of these kinds of shows with visualizations, and any other, you know, music and, you know, all kinds of different mediums, all controlled um, through like, you know, custom built tech tools, I think. Yeah, so that's what I think of creative coding. And then, you know, broad, more generally, I think of just technology based and code based art pieces. And yeah, I think yeah, I can go on with examples.
Yeah, I mean, we've already kind of begun to cover all the possibilities. But yeah, I guess just, you know, we've been trying to think of it again with the pandemic, thinking about what it would mean, because I love to have art that is interactive. For me, my ideal piece of art is an interactive installation that you actually have to take apart in order for it to be completely observed. And so I'm always interested in making sure people are touching and interacting and changing the art. That's my favorite kind of art to make if it's possible, but it's rare to actually be able to do that because you need a space, you need a bunch of resources, you need materials. And it feels like with this digital piece, you could build a whole environment that's obviously interactive, and you don't need actual materials or an actual space or for people to come and touch the art. So yeah, I guess that's my area of interest. And do you see that being possible? One of the things we're
Yeah.
interested in with Shred is like, how do you recreate the venue, like the live art experience, in a way that's not just looking at a performance on a screen? So that's what we're thinking about.
Yeah. I think like yeah, we have, I mean, there's tons of examples of like very tangible art pieces driven with technology, or like um, um, you know, I remember one art piece that a professor of mine made where she used the hardware sensor in a computer laptop, which is generally used to detect if a computer has fallen, and then safeguards the hard drive and other, you know, internal pieces on the computer by, I don't know, turning them off or for whatever purposes it's used by the OS. But she used that sensor to drive an animation or some kind of art piece. So the way you interacted with this art piece was by literally slapping the computer or
That's
like, you know,
cool.
hitting it, you know.
I do that
And
when I'm not supposed to.
and then you know, the program responds, you know, and it was like such like an out of the box project for me. Is So yeah, so I think, there's an endless possibilities of bringing art and computation into the physical world.
Mhm.
Uh, and Yeah.
Well, lots more to explore, and maybe something we can work on in the future and invite others to dream on with us. So I'd like to now pivot a little bit and talk a bit more about your efforts to end caste. Can you
Oh,
explain
yeah.
caste to me a bit? I only vaguely know a little bit about it. So can you explain it to me and others who might not be familiar, and why you're dedicated to ending it?
Yeah, caste is a hierarchical form of um, uh, ordering society that's hereditary, in other, or not hereditary, but that's passed down through generations, um, and um, and it's a form of control of the majority for the benefit of the few at the top of the caste pyramid. That's why it's a pyramid, where it's a tiny tiny at the top and massive at the base. Um, and it's a form of discrimination that is kind of rooted in Hindu scriptures and sanctified by the scriptures, and so much so that today folks don't even, like, even though it plainly says, like, you know people are and they belong to different castes, and the people in the lower castes uh, need to be treated differently. Like, there's kind of a disconnect when it comes to uh, the world people today living in the caste system today, are just not able to make that connection. I think it's because of this layer of privilege that I talk about. People who benefit off of the caste system have no incentive to question it, or to upend it, or to get rid of it.
Mm.
So yeah, so that is the caste system. It is reflected even today. It exists in South Asia. It exists. I think, or one way of characterizing it is like, it goes where Indians go. So, for
Mm.
example, in the United States, it's now a big uh, caste is very prevalent too, unfortunately, and
Mhm.
it's important to uh, yeah the it's important, I think, to intercept it in the early stages of becoming also then a acceptable form of discrimination in the United States.
Mm.
And there's a lot of work being done by really amazing organizers.
Mm.
um,
Is it comparable? Is Answer this however you like, but is it comparable to any other systems of discrimination that we might be more familiar with as people who are US centric?
yeah, I mean, so casteism is this idea that it's divide society is divided into four castes, four large castes. Of course, there's hundreds of subcastes within each of these larger ones, but
Mm.
the top said Brahmins. And generally, another way of discussing caste is talking about it as a Brahminical culture. This idea of hierarchical structures, and this idea that there's always going to be someone who in the caste system ranks below you, and so you always are meant to feel better in the context of, no matter how much oppression you're facing, there's always someone else you can oppress,
Mhm.
because it's so stratified as a system. And I've kind of I see the parallels to, although definitely is not the same as the way that racial hierarchies work in the United States, and how white supremacy works, right? So I think
Mhm.
there are some parallels between Brahminism and white supremacy, um, and what's scary actually is where they work together, where white supremacy and Brahmanism collude to. Yeah, I mean that's basically what was happening with Trump and the current Prime Minister of India, Modi, who is basically a Hindu fundamentalist. Yeah, so that is really scary, but thankfully Trump is no more in power.
Mhm.
At least one of them is out of the picture.
Yeah, I recall a few of my very good friends. Actually, the first person to actually bring me into movement work, Christina Tendilia, and another friend of mine, Mansi, went and protested at a gathering of Hindu fundamentalists, and a man choked one of them. Like when they began to do their interruption, they were faced with immediate physical violence, more than I've ever encountered when I do something like that. So
Yeah.
that kind of woke me up to how serious it was here in the United States. So what can people like me who haven't been impacted by this system do or learn to help efforts to end it? And what can you tell us a bit about what those efforts look like, and how we can support folks who are on the front lines?
Yeah, I think Equality Labs is an organization to check out. They're doing wonderful work in bringing more. I mean, they have already done amazing work bringing attention to caste and having a caste analysis to everything related to South Asian issues in the United States. And there's if you want to learn more, they have like reading lists on their website. Um, you can yeah, otherwise there's also, they have a newsletter that you can sign up for, and they have various kinds of action items for folks to sign up for frequently. And I think yeah, and I think caste is yeah, unfortunately here to stay unless we fight it. So
Yeah.
I think it's on all of us.
Yeah. And you were noting that you kind of play an ally role in some ways because you're part of a higher caste than some of your comrades. What does that feel like for you? And how have you found ways to really feel like you're doing that well?
Yeah, it's a little complicated in that I come from a caste that belongs to the bottom of the caste pyramid, but at the same time, are a privileged caste, have a lot of power,
Mm-hmm.
and that's primarily as a result of, I think, owning. Well, basically come from caste who are landowners. And hold power, but regionally within India. Um, as with so many things, there's so many contradictions for every, when I
Mm-hmm.
say there's privilege, there's also less
Yeah.
privilege for certain members of my caste and certain other, certain regions of India.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but nevertheless, at the end of the day, I come from a dominant caste or a privileged caste, and yeah, and I think, and it's the violence you talked about that you experienced, or your friend had experienced at the protests. I think this is what happens when like your entire worldview just gets upended,
Mm-hmm.
because the caste system is at the root of the Hindu religion. It essentially means kind of letting go, or like questioning very basic assumptions that you've grown up with,
Yeah.
and folks aren't uh, folks aren't ready to question uh, some basic facts about themselves and their religion they belong to.
Yeah. Yeah, that is something I chew on all the time, as far as knowing what I know about our nervous systems and why we respond with violence when we're afraid. Yes, it's a mechanism to dominate, but it's really at its core a fear mechanism. And I'm really thinking hard about my privileges as a person who has very light skin, but I have Black heritage, understanding that I benefit immensely from colorism and from the economics that not a lot of economic stability, but more economic stability than I would have had if both of my parents were Black. thinking about if that softens me to people who are white supremacists, to where I'm like, well, that's my grandfather, so I can imagine sitting through a conversation with him, and like how I would never prescribe that to somebody else who would face more violence from him. But that maybe it's my role to interact in a way that softens his ego and his nervous system enough to transform a little bit, and whether I want to do that or not, and whether that has to be my constant role, or if I can come in and out of that role as I'm able to. And I'm coming more into this piece of like, I have to check in with how I'm feeling, because I know that work is part of how we'll transform, but I can't expect it to be the work, and I can't expect myself to always hold that level of space for violence. But there's a role that I am responsible for that means I am safer to do that riskier work than others might be. So that's kind of how I've been contextualizing it in my own experience. And again, just living with that uncertainty and being like, this is what it is. At least I'm aware. At least I'm putting myself in a position to adapt to new information. And at least I can feel less afraid and lash out less whenever my assumptions are challenged. And it's also really informative whenever I do feel triggered or fearful, or like I often am like, oh man, I'm going to get kicked. Like people are going to think I'm not allowed to be in a space for Black people. And I used to get really nervous about it. And now I'm prepared if somebody challenges me, and I'm prepared to hold that and accept that, and not respond with my gut reaction, which would be either to run away or to fight back, and rather to try to engage in a conversation if I can, or to say, that's okay, not everything is for me. If it makes you feel better, I can leave. So I've been really grappling with a lot of that lately, and it's interesting to hear all of the complexities mirrored in what you're navigating.
Yeah, I grapple with it when it comes to bringing along my own family on my journey, as I learn and I grow and as I evolve, to bring them along, and how many folks in my family I can actually do this with.
Yeah.
I cannot do it with all of them.
Mm-hmm.
So I start with my parents, my sister, but I sometimes I don't have energy for my extended family.
Mm-hmm.
And it can get really contentious, and yeah, and I'm figuring out how to, in the limited amount of time that I do interact with other folks in my family, like how is it best spent.
Mm-hmm.
How do I get into conversations where my family members are more open to what I have to say. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I realize that at some point it's a lot about how much time and effort that I spend. And if I'm going to come in and out every once in a while, I'm not gonna, it's not fair for me to expect as much change either.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, solidarity in this liminal space we exist in. I'm happy to know that you're somebody I can maybe ask questions to about how you're navigating this very emotionally challenging work that we actually have to do if we're going to transform ourselves in each other. On that note, what are some hopes and dreams you have for yourself, your community, and your work?
Yeah, I think as far as my work, I really want to be proud of everything I do, looking back. And I think I've come to this after working at a couple of companies like Disney, Electronic Arts, and after working there, I never really felt like I could never really talk about it in a joyful way with others. And so I think I really made a choice then, I don't know, about 5-6 years ago now, to really focus on work that I will always be proud of, um, and really passionate about doing. And outside of that, and I think I do this work because, like I said, I want to end the caste, and the first step, I think, towards that is making those discussions about anti-Blackness and caste within our communities more okay, or just start having those conversations. I think because right now, like a lot of privileged caste folks, which is a lot of them here in the United States, will just deny the very existence of caste or its importance and its role in society. So I think it's so important to just have just open conversations about these issues, and I think that's what I'm hoping to do with my work.
Well, I hope you never have to work a job that you hate and are not proud of again. That's our goal too. We find ways to make ends meet and support and connect and network, and maybe even move away from needing a bigger paycheck and instead saying we can support each other and provide things that we have in abundance and not have to really engage in the economic market quite as much. Of course, we also want to make that market work for our people and for workers and for everybody. So I like that goal. That's a great goal. What are you doing to take care of yourself these days?
I'm eating much better thanks to the pandemic. I've had some health setbacks, not COVID related, but nevertheless, I've realized and been forced by my body to eat much healthier and just exercise more. Yeah, COVID has definitely impacted me, but not in the ways that I thought. I mean, not in the way that I had COVID.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I hope your health is as good as it can be in the future. Happy to hear you're taking care. Anything else you'd like to say before we log off? And can you tell me the name of the anti-caste organization one more time, just so folks can hear it, and we'll link it?
Yeah, Equality Labs.
Okay, thank you.
And I think the URL is equalitylabs.org.
Okay. Cool. Anything else you'd like to say before we sign off?
That's it. I think, the only thing is for organizers or people who want to do organized Twitter storms, check out organize.org. That's organize without an E at the end.org. And you can sign in and request access to start creating your campaigns.
Yeah, I can do it. That means y'all can do it. I promise. And y'all have really responsive help, right? For people, like part of if you purchase the service, you get like priority help and feedback right away.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Yeah,
And
less intimidation.
And more, and gifts, custom gifts for every campaign. That's on Organize. So I think that's exciting.
That's very exciting, and I can't wait to dig into that work with you more. All right, everybody, thanks so much for being with us. This was episode 14 of Shred Radio. You can now find our full website at shred-mag.com, fully launched. We've got some really cool interviews up, all of the previous Shred Radios, some kind of foundational frameworks we're using. We're working on a list of questions we want to found a lot of our work on. So excited to keep collaborating with folks and interviewing folks. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube. If we get 100 subscribers, we get our own URL, and we're up to 19. So if you guys want to subscribe, that would be fun. We can get our own YouTube URL. And also, if you'd like to contribute to the work we do in a financial way, you can become a patron at patreon.com/shredmagazine. We have really cool gifts at all levels. There's a $3 a month level, all the way up to, I think, 100, with patches, art, music, jewelry, all kinds of stuff that we want to send you if you'd like to become a patron. Again, that's patreon.com/shredmagazine. And those funds go to things like keeping our website up, paying our artists, helping to fund all the research and tools we want to build. And also we contribute to mutual aid funds sometimes if the folks that we're doing work with don't need the money. So yeah, we try to spread the wealth around and also keep our structure here going so that we don't have to depend on things like Facebook and Instagram quite as much. We have to, the algorithm does not like us to be doing what we're doing. So we want to make sure our own platform has reach and distribution. And luckily we have folks like Kedar in our wing to help us figure that stuff out too. So much love, everybody. Thank you so much. Take care of yourselves. And